In the bitter winter of 1876, under the harsh Dakota sky, a young bride stands abandoned. Cast aside by her own family, she faces certain death in the frozen prairie. But fate has other plans. Through the swirling snow rides a proud Apache warrior bound by ancient laws and honor. He finds her trembling form and makes a choice that will change both of their lives forever. Taking her into his protection, he leads her into the sacred valleys of his people, where survival means adapting to a new way of life. As she discovers her inner strength and he grapples with tribal expectations, their growing bond threatens to shatter two worlds on the brink of war. Can love truly bridge the gap between their cultures? Can a woman cast out by her own people find salvation in the arms of those she was taught to fear? Before we dive deeper, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story moves you, be sure to subscribe, because tomorrow I've got something extra special for you. The leather-bound Bible slipped from Clara Thornfield's trembling hands, landing softly in the fresh snow. She didn't bend to pick it up. She couldn't. With her wrist tightly bound behind her, the holy book lay there, its gold-leafed pages darkening with moisture, much like her own fate, which grew dimmer by the moment. The morning sun cast long shadows across the prairie, turning the pristine white landscape into a canvas of purple and blue shadows stretching endlessly toward the horizon. The Lord's judgment falls on the wicked. Her father's voice rang out bitter as the wind, cutting through her thin dress. He wouldn't look at her. This man who had once carried her on his shoulders through summer wheat fields now sat rigid atop his horse, eyes fixed on a distant point beyond her shoulder, as though she had already ceased to exist. Ruth Dawson, her mother, wept silently in the wagon behind him, but made no move to intervene. The shame of a daughter accused of witchcraft and consorting with spirits would stain their family's name far worse than a quick death on the winter prairie. That's what the town council decided after 3 days of closed-door meetings that sealed her fate. "I didn't," Clara began, but her father raised his hand, silencing her, just as he had done so many times before. "The evidence speaks for itself," he said, his voice hollow. "The marks on Miller's cattle, the strange lights in the woods, the death of your fiancé the night before your wedding." His fingers tightened on the reins. "God have mercy on your soul." The irony wasn't lost on her. Luke Calloway had died of a fever, nothing more. The same fever that had claimed half a dozen others that autumn. But grief and fear had transformed a natural death into something sinister. And she, the outsider bride brought in from the Eastern Territories, had become the perfect scapegoat. The wagon creaked as her mother shifted, perhaps reaching for her father's arm, perhaps simply adjusting her shawl against the bitter cold. Clara would never know. The sharp crack of the whip made the horses start, and the wagon lurched forward, carrying with it the last traces of her old life. "May God forgive us all," her father murmured so softly she almost missed it beneath the wind's howl. Then he too turned away, leaving her alone with the vast emptiness of the Dakota Territory. Clara watched until the wagon disappeared into the swirling snow, taking with it any hope of redemption or rescue. Her fingers had long since gone numb, both from the rope that bound them and the merciless cold. The sun, though bright, offered no warmth. Winter had come early this year, as if nature itself conspired in her punishment. She looked down at the Bible, now half buried in fresh powder. Within its pages were pressed flowers from her mother's garden letters, from her sister back east, and all the small treasures that had marked her 20 years of life. Now they would freeze alongside her, preserved in ice until the spring thaw, revealing them to whatever wolves or travelers might find her remains. The wind picked up driving needles of ice against her face. In the distance, storm clouds gathered dark and heavy with nature's fury. She had perhaps hours before the blizzard hit, less than that before the cold took her. Already her legs trembled with the effort of standing, and her thoughts began to swim in the peculiar way she'd heard preceded freezing to death. A lone wolf's howl echoed across the prairie, closer than comfort would allow. Clara closed her eyes, dried tears crackling on her cheeks, like frozen stars. Lord, she whispered, though she no longer knew if she believed, if you're listening, send me a sign, any sign. The wind's only answer was to whip her skirts around her legs and toss her unbound hair into her eyes. When she opened them again, the storm clouds had drawn closer, and with them came the first scattered flakes of what promised to be a killing snow. Clara took one step, then another, though she had no destination in mind. East led back to civilization and certain death. West led to Indian territory and an equally certain fate. North and south offered only endless prairie and this promise of a cold grave beneath the stars. The wolf howled again, and this time, somewhere in the distance, another answered. The shawl had once belonged to her grandmother, a fine weave of Scottish wool that had crossed an ocean and a continent to end up here collecting snow in the Dakota wilderness. Clara tucked her chin into the familiar softness of her shawl, though it offered little protection against the growing wind. Her hands, still bound tightly behind her, had long since passed the point of sharp pain, now numb and distant, a coldness that terrified her more than the storm itself. The blizzard descended quickly, fierce and unforgiving, like a hunter closing in on its prey. What had begun as light flurries rapidly transformed into a blinding sheet of white, blurring everything beyond arm's reach. The wind drove ice crystals into her face, each one cutting like 1,000 tiny blades. Her tears froze before they could fall, tiny diamonds of sorrow now mingling with the snow on her cheeks. Time became meaningless in the endless white. She continued walking because stopping meant death, but each step became harder, more painful than the last. The rope around her wrists, soaked through with snow, had frozen solid, turning into a band of ice that scraped against her skin with every movement. She had tried rubbing her hands against a tree earlier, but the rough bark had only torn her skin, leaving tracks of blood that quickly froze. A gust of wind knocked her off balance, sending her staggering sideways. She couldn't tell which way she had been walking. The swirling snow had swallowed any sign of direction. The sun had disappeared behind the storm clouds, taking with it any hope of navigation. She could be walking in circles, retracing her own steps until exhaustion finally claimed her. The howl of a lone wolf echoed again, this time much closer. Clara's heart jumped in her chest. She had heard stories of wolves following travelers in the winter, waiting for the moment of weakness to strike. Her father had once said wolves could smell fear. If that was true, she must reek of it now. Something dark loomed ahead in the white void, a lone rock or perhaps a dead tree. Clara made her way toward it, desperate for any shelter from the wind. As she drew closer, the shape resolved itself into a cluster of boulders, worn smooth by countless winters. A narrow gap between two of the largest stones offered a small refuge from the storm. Clara wedged herself into the space, grateful for even this small reprieve. The rocks still held a trace of the sun's warmth, though it was fading quickly. She pushed her shoulders against the stone, trying to relieve the pressure of her bound arms. The effort drained what little energy she had left, but the possibility of freeing her hands seemed worth it. Then a sound broke through the howling wind, the soft crunch of snow under hooves. Hope and fear collided in her chest. Travelers could mean rescue, but they might also be members of her own community, returning to finish what they had started. The sound grew closer now, accompanied by the faint jingle of harness bells. Clara pressed herself deeper into the rock's shelter, straining to see through the curtain of snow. A shadow appeared, larger than any horse she had ever seen. As it drew nearer, she realized why. It wasn't just one horse, but two moving together in perfect harmony. The riders appeared as dark silhouettes against the white storm, their movements fluid, too natural, too much a part of their mounts. Clara's breath caught in her throat as a recognition struck her. These weren't settlers, these were wild riders from the deep prairie. Their long hair whipped in the wind, adorned with feathers, as if they were part of the storm itself. She tried to make herself as small as possible, hoping to disappear into the rocks, but it was too late. One of the riders had already turned his horse toward her shelter. She caught a glimpse of paint on his face, white and red designs that seemed to float in the air, disconnected from the human form beneath. His eyes met hers across the snow-filled space, dark and unreadable as the storm itself. Clara's world narrowed to that single moment, stretched as thin as ice over a winter river. Everything she had been taught about the savage natives, all the whispered stories and dire warnings, collided with the stark reality of her situation. She was already sentenced to die by her own people. Could these strangers truly offer a worse fate? The warrior raised his hand, and Clara couldn't tell if it was a greeting or a signal to his companion. The wind chose that moment to gust again, sweeping a wall of white between them. When the storm cleared, the riders had disappeared like smoke, leaving only tracks that were quickly filling with fresh snow. Clara sagged against the rock, her legs finally giving way. The brief encounter had left her trembling, though, whether from fear or something else she couldn't say. The wolves howled once more, their voices blending eerily with the wind. But now other sounds reached her ears, the distant thunder of hooves, the cry of an eagle far overhead, and somewhere, carried on the edge of the storm, the soft beat of drums. Colt Hawk traced the eagle feather in his hair with calloused fingers, a gesture passed down from his father, a warrior's prayer before a difficult choice. The storm spirits danced around him, their white robes swirling across the prairie like the ghost dancers of old. His companion, Jace Ryder, had already turned back toward their camp, believing they had seen enough. But something kept Colt Hawk in place, his eyes fixed on the tracks that told a story no honorable warrior could ignore: a woman bound and abandoned. The signs were clear in the snow, despite the storm's attempt to erase them. A wagon's wheels, horse hooves, then a single set of footprints walking aimlessly, circling like a wounded animal. His people had many stories about the cruelty of the white man, but this was something else, something that went against the laws of both their peoples. "The council won't approve," Jace Ryder called over the wind, his voice heavy with warning. "It's not our way to meddle in the affairs of the Wasiku." Colt Hawk's horse stamped restlessly beneath him, sensing his rider's growing tension. The eagle feather in his hair fluttered in the wind, and with it came the voice of his grandmother. "Sometimes the spirits place obstacles in our path, not to stop us, but to test if we are worthy of the journey." He could see the woman now huddled between the rocks like a fragile bird, her dress ill-suited for the brutal cold, nearly frozen solid. Her bound hands had turned the color of storm clouds. Without help, she would not survive another hour. The laws of his people were clear about interfering with the settlers. But there were older laws, deeper ones taught by the buffalo and the winter wind. Laws about honor, about protecting the helpless, and the sacred duty of the strong to shelter the weak. Colt Hawk dismounted silently, his moccasins making no sound in the fresh snow. Behind him, Jace Ryder muttered a prayer to their ancestors, but made no move to stop him. They both understood the gravity of the situation. Once seen, this woman's fate would be tied to their honor. To leave her would mean carrying the weight of her death through every winter to come. She saw him approach. Her eyes widened with fear, deeper than he had expected. The whites feared his people, but seeing that terror up close stirred something profound in his heart. Here was no enemy, no threat to his tribe, just a young woman betrayed by her own blood, facing death with whatever courage she could muster. Colt Hawk stopped a few paces away, deliberately, keeping his movements slow and calm, as one might approach a frightened horse. He touched his chest, then extended his hand, palm up, a gesture of peace as old as the hills. "You are safe now," he said in his own tongue, knowing she wouldn't understand the words, but hoping she would feel the truth in his voice. Then, drawing on the little English he had learned from traders, he added, "No harm." Her lips moved, but no sound came out. She was far gone with the cold, her skin taking on the translucent quality that preceded freezing death. Colt Hawk shrugged off his buffalo robe and in 2 long strides closed the distance between them, wrapping the heavy fur around her shoulders. The touch of the warm hide seemed to break something inside her. She sagged against him, either from relief or because her strength had finally failed. Colt Hawk caught her before she could fall, turning her gently to examine the ropes that bound her wrists. Ice had formed around the bindings, fusing cloth and skin together. His knife would be needed and a healer's touch afterward. Jace Ryder appeared beside him, leading both horses. "If we do this thing," he said quietly, "there is no turning back. The council will demand answers." Colt Hawk lifted the woman into his arms, feeling how light she was, fragile, like lifting a snow owl. Her bones hollow and frozen. The eagle feather brushed his cheek in the wind, reminding him of his grandmother's final teaching. The greatest warriors are not those who take the most lives, but those who save them. "Then I will give them answers," Colt Hawk replied, settling the woman carefully onto his horse. "I will tell them. I found a dying bird in the snow, and the spirits themselves would curse us if we left her to the wolves." The woman's eyes fluttered open as Colt Hawk mounted behind her, one arm holding her secure against his chest. In her eyes he saw not just fear, but a spark of something else, something that reminded him of the prairie stars, bright and enduring. Against the vast dark of winter nights, Jace Ryder snorted, but there was resigned acceptance in the sound. "Your father named you well, friend. You stand like a bear before the storm, unmovable, once your mind is set." He wheeled his horse toward home. "May the ancestors guide us, for we will need their wisdom before this tale ends." The medicine pouch swayed gently between them. With the horse's motion, Clara Thornfield's eyes fixed on its intricate beadwork, finding strange comfort in the geometric patterns that seemed to dance in the fading light. Her rescuer, she still couldn't think of him as a savage, not after what her own people had done. He held her steady with one strong arm while guiding his horse with practiced ease through the deepening snow. The storm had eased somewhat, though darkness now crept in from the east, bringing with it a bone-deep cold that made her earlier suffering seem mild by comparison. The buffalo robe wrapped around her shoulders carried the scent of wood smoke and prairie sage, so different from the harsh lye soap of her former life. Her wrists, finally freed from their bonds, throbbed with returning circulation. The warrior had used his knife with surprising gentleness, carefully separating the frozen rope from her flesh before applying some strong-smelling salve from the medicine pouch. Now her hands rested awkwardly in her lap, stripped raw in places, but slowly warming. "Medicine good heal quick." His deep voice rumbled against her back, the English words carefully chosen. More soon when we reached camp, Clara Thornfield managed a small nod, not trusting her voice. The last hour had passed in a blur of sensation and confusion. The terror of being discovered had given way to desperate gratitude, then to a strange calm that might have been the beginning of acceptance, or simply exhaustion. Jace Ryder rode ahead, his silhouette faint in the dimming light. Every so often he'd stop and wait for them, to catch up before moving on again. Clara noticed he kept his right hand near his weapon, his eyes constantly scanning the horizon. At first she thought he was looking for wolves, but soon realized he was watching for her people in case they returned to finish what they'd started. She whispered, her voice barely audible, "I thank you. My name is Clara." She added the words catching in her throat. There was a moment of silence broken only by the hollow sound of hooves crunching through the snow. Then Colt Hawk touched his chest, then gestured to Jace Ryder. "Jace Ryder," he said, pausing before adding, "Clara, good name." The simple exchange shifted the air between them. Clara felt some of the rigid tension in her shoulders ease, though she couldn't explain why. Perhaps it was the simple humanity of names of acknowledging one another. The stories she'd grown up hearing painted the natives as mindless savages. But there was nothing savage in the way Colt Hawk had treated her wounds, nothing savage in the gentle support he now offered. A sudden gust of wind caught her grandmother's shawl still draped around her shoulders, beneath the buffalo robe. Colt Hawk reached out with his free hand and caught the fabric before it could fly away, tucking it more securely around her. His fingers brushed her neck for an instant, and Clara was surprised to find she didn't flinch. "You're in my care," Colt Hawk said slowly, thoughtfully. "They do this." When he made a gesture toward her wrists, then toward the empty prairie behind them, Clara nodded, bitterness creeping into her voice. "They said I was cursed evil." The words tasted like ashes in her mouth. "They left me to die." Colt Hawk was quiet for a long moment, processing her words. When he spoke again, his voice held a deep sadness. Many evil things in world helping others, not one of them. He touched the medicine pouch. My grandmother taught me. Every life is sacred, even enemies, even strangers. Tears pricked at Clara's eyes, hot against her cold cheeks. The simple wisdom in his words cut deeper than any sermon she'd ever heard in her father's church. Before she could respond, Jace Ryder called something out in their native tongue. Colt Hawk straightened his arm, tightening around her. "Camp near," he said. "My people, some won't understand, but you are safe. I give my word." The medicine pouch swayed gently between them, its beads catching the last light of day. Clara reached out with trembling fingers, brushing them lightly over the beadwork, feeling the smooth coolness. Colt Hawk made a soft sound of approval. "Good," he said. "Medicine." For healing the body, he touched her shoulder gently, and maybe for healing the heart as well. The carved wooden horse appeared in Colt Hawk's hands as they neared a sheltered grove of cottonwoods. Its surface was smooth from years of handling, the details worn but still visible, flowing mane alert, ears and eyes that seemed to hold a deep wisdom. He offered it to Clara as she huddled near the small fire Jace Ryder had built. Her hands wrapped around a steaming cup of pine needle tea. "First horse I made," Colt Hawk explained, settling beside her, but maintaining a respectful distance. "Many winters ago my father taught me, if you want to know something, you must make it." He gestured to the horse. Many days watching, learning how the horse moves, thinks, feels. Then many more days, with knife and wood. Clara accepted the carving, running her fingers over its familiar yet foreign form. The horse was captured mid-stride, its body suggesting movement, even in stillness. Unlike the stiff, decorative carvings she'd seen in shops back east, this one seemed alive with possibility. "Watch," Colt Hawk said, pointing to where Jace Ryder tended their horses. "See how they stand in the storm." The animals had positioned themselves in a circle, their heads facing inward, their bodies creating a windbreak against the weather. "Horse wisdom," he continued. "Together they make shelter. Alone they die." The lesson wasn't lost on Clara. She watched as Jace Ryder moved among the animals, checking their hooves for ice buildup, speaking to them in low tones. His earlier weariness seemed to fade when he worked with the horses, replaced by a gentle patience she wouldn't have thought possible from a warrior. "Your people," Clara hesitated, searching for words that wouldn't sound offensive. "They understand all animals differently than we do." Colt Hawk nodded, adding a small branch to their fire. "All things connected. Horse not just for riding, wolf not just for fearing. Each creature carries teaching if we learn to see her." Clara touched the wooden carving in her hands. "This horse taught me patience, respect. Maybe now it will teach you the same thing." The wind howled beyond their shelter, but within the grove, the cottonwoods softened the force, turning the gusts into mere whispers. Clara found herself relaxing, despite the biting cold. The warmth from the tea spread through her chest like a blessing, comforting and steadying her. Jace Ryder returned to the fire, settling down on the opposite side with fluid grace. He spoke to Colt Hawk in their language, his tone serious but not rushed. Colt Hawk listened, then translated for Clara. "Storm's growing stronger. We must reach winter camp before night fully falls. 3 hours ride still." Clara's heart quickened at the thought of meeting more of their people, but she forced herself to stay calm. These two had shown her nothing but kindness. Surely their tribe couldn't be all that different. Still, she recalled Colt Hawk's earlier warning about some not understanding. As if reading her thoughts, Colt Hawk added softly, "My mother waits at camp. She's a wise woman, a respected healer. She will help others understand." He touched the medicine pouch at his belt. "These medicines are from her teaching." They doused the fire and mounted their horses, but not before Colt Hawk showed Clara how to wrap her feet in rabbit fur to prevent frostbite. It was a simple technique, but one that made her marvel at its effectiveness. The carved wooden horse found a home in a pouch at her waist, its solid presence oddly comforting. As they rode, the landscape changed. The flat prairie was replaced with small hollows, and rises and trees appeared more frequently. Colt Hawk pointed out markers. She would have missed a distinctively shaped rock, a bent tree, a cluster of bushes that somehow spoke of direction to his trained eye. "The land speaks," he said, guiding his horse around a snow-covered boulder. "Like a good friend, always telling the truth if you learn to listen." He gestured to a distant line of hills barely visible through the darkening sky. "Their winter camp waits. Safe place, good water shelter from wind, plenty of game." Jace Ryder called something back that made Colt Hawk chuckle. Clara glanced up in question, and he translated. "He says you learn fast for a Wasiku, a white person. Many cannot see the land at all. Only things to take from it." The simplicity of the statement struck Clara deeply. How many times had she heard her father and the other settlers speak of the land, only in terms of what it could provide: fields for farming, trees for lumber, rivers for mills. Never once had they talked about listening to it, learning from it. The carved horse pressed against her side as their mount navigated a steep slope, and Clara found herself wondering what other wisdom these people had. What other truths had she been blind to in her former life? The storm continued to rage around them, but now Clara began to listen to its voice differently, not as nature's fury, but as part of a larger conversation she was only beginning to understand. The sacred pipe appeared first as a silhouette against the firelight, held high by an elder, whose face was lined with the deep marks of many winters. Clara watched from Colt Hawk's horse as the camp emerged from the storm's darkness. A circle of hide lodges, smoke rising from their tops to meet the swirling snow. The sight struck her with its simple perfection, so different from the rigid rows of settler cabins she had known. Dogs announced their arrival, first barking with a mix of warning and welcome. Then came the people emerging from their lodges like shadows taking shape. Children ducked behind their mothers' skirts, pointing and whispering. Warriors stood tall, their expressions guarded but not hostile, watching them closely. The elder with the pipe moved through the crowd, his presence parting them like a stone parting water. "My grandfather Colt Hawk," murmured his voice, laced with both respect and apprehension. "Medicine man of the band, he will decide first words." The old man stopped before their horses, his dark eyes locking with Clara's with unsettling directness. He spoke in their language, his voice deep and melodic despite his age. Colt Hawk replied with formal words, including Clara's name, then added something that made the old man's eyebrows rise. "He asks if you were truly cast out by your own blood," Colt Hawk translated quietly. Clara nodded, forcing herself to meet the elder's gaze. "Yes," she said softly, though she knew he wouldn't understand her words. "They left me to the storm's mercy." Colt Hawk translated again, and something shifted in the old man's expression. He raised the pipe, speaking words that seemed to carry weight beyond their sound. The crowd murmured, and Clara felt the atmosphere change, though she couldn't say how. Colt Hawk translated. "He says the pipe has shown him a vision." He helped Clara down from the horse. Her legs trembled from the cold and the ride, but she forced herself to stand straight. "A white bird lost in winter, finding shelter in an eagle's nest," Colt Hawk explained. "He says such things do not happen by chance." Just then, a woman emerged from the crowd. Her silver-streaked hair was bound in 2 long braids. Unlike the others, Singing Brook walked straight toward Clara, her movements confident and purposeful. Without hesitation, she took Clara's cold hands in her warm ones, gently turning them to examine the rope burns on her wrists. "My mother," Colt Hawk said, pride evident in his voice. "The healing woman I spoke of." The woman clicked her tongue in disapproval as she examined Clara's injuries, and then spoke rapidly to her son. Colt Hawk nodded. "She says you need warm food, dry clothes, and medicine for these wounds. The council can wait until you're stronger." The elder raised the pipe once more, speaking words that silenced the murmuring crowd. Jace Ryder, who had been quietly translating for another warrior, turned to Clara with unusual gentleness. In his expression, He gives permission for you to stay, he said in careful English. Says the storm spirits brought you to us for a reason. We must wait to see what that purpose is. Singing Brook gently tugged at Clara's arm, motioning toward one of the larger lodges. The warmth and light spilling from its entrance beckoned like a promise of safety. Clara hesitated, glancing back at Colt Hawk. He nodded, encouraging her. Go. Mother will care for you. I must speak with the council, explain things. His hand brushed the eagle feather in his hair, a gesture she was beginning to recognize as his way of gathering strength. Rest now. Be strong for tomorrow. As Clara followed Singing Brook toward the lodge, she could hear the grandfather speaking again. The words were foreign, but their cadence reminded her of her father's prayers. Not the harsh judgments of recent days, but the older blessings she remembered from childhood, full of mystery and hope. A young girl darted from behind her mother's skirts, pressing something into Clara's hand before running away with a giggle. It was a small bag of dried berries, the kind Clara had often traded for at the settlement's edge. The simple gesture brought unexpected tears to her eyes. Inside the lodge, warmth enveloped Clara like an embrace. Singing Brook guided her to a pile of soft furs near the central fire where an older woman was preparing a steaming drink that smelled of herbs and honey. The firelight danced on their clothing and the beadwork creating patterns that seemed to come alive on the lodge walls. Clara clutched the small bag of berries, thinking of the carved wooden horse at her waist and the medicine pouch that had begun to feel like a symbol of her healing. 3 gifts, freely given, 3 tokens of acceptance, in a world she had been taught to fear. Outside she could hear the council gathering, their deep voices carried on the wind like distant thunder. But here in this moment, watching the fire paint shadows on the lodge walls, she felt something she had not expected to feel. Again, hope. Dawn arrived with the gift of a beaded dress laid beside Clara's sleeping furs, while the morning star still hung in the sky. The garment spoke of both practicality and beauty. Sturdy hide decorated with intricate patterns of blue and white beads that reminded Clara of flowing water. Singing Brook, whose name Clara had learned, helped her into the unfamiliar clothing with gentle patience. For a new path, the older woman said in halting English, smoothing the dress over Clara's shoulders. Old life, like winter snow, melts away, feeds spring flowers. She touched one of the beaded patterns. These say woman, who walks between worlds. My grandmother's dress, now yours. Clara ran her fingers over the beadwork, feeling the stories woven into each careful stitch. The dress fit as if it had been made for her, though it had clearly been crafted decades before her birth. The weight of its history settled around her like a blessing. Outside, the camp was already alive with morning activity. Women moved purposefully between lodges, carrying water and gathering materials for the day's work. Children darted about like prairie sparrows, their laughter carrying on the crisp morning air. The storm had passed during the night, leaving behind a world transformed by fresh snow and crystalline light. Colt Hawk appeared from the direction of the horse herd, his breath visible in the cold air. He paused when he saw her, something flickering in his expression that made Clara's heart skip. "The dress," he said softly. "It suits you." Before she could respond, a group of women approached, led by a tall, graceful woman whose bearing reminded Clara of the deer she had sometimes glimpsed at dawn. "My sister, Tessa Gray," Colt Hawk introduced. "She will show you the women's ways." Tessa Gray's smile carried no trace of the previous night's weariness. "Come," she said, her English clearer than Clara had expected. "Much to learn, much to share." She gestured to the other women. "We prepare pemmican today. Good food for winter. Good time for stories." The work circle welcomed Clara with the same gentle acceptance she had received from Tessa Gray. They showed her how to slice dried meat thin, how to pound it with berries and fat until it became a rich, preservable food. As they worked, they taught her words in their language. Simple things at first, names of tools and ingredients. One of the younger women, barely more than a girl, giggled when Clara mispronounced a word, but it was laughter that carried warmth, followed by patient corrections and shared smiles. Clara found herself laughing too. The sound felt strange in her throat, a relief after so many days of fear and silence. "You have good hands," an elder observed, watching Clara's careful handling of the meat. "Respectful. Some wasiku rush. Waste much. You understand value." The morning passed in a blur of activity and learning. Clara's arms ached from the unaccustomed work, but it was a good ache, honest and earned. She watched how the women moved, their efficiency born from generations of practice. Every task had its rhythm, its proper way, yet there was room for conversation and laughter. Colt Hawk appeared again near midday, carrying something wrapped in hide. He waited until there was a natural pause in the work before approaching. "The council has spoken," he said, his voice carefully neutral. "They say you may stay through winter, learn our ways. When spring comes," he paused. "When spring comes, you choose your path." The women around Clara continued their work, but she could feel their attention, their quiet support. Tessa Gray moved slightly closer, her presence offering silent strength. Colt Hawk unwrapped the bundle he carried, revealing a pair of beautifully beaded moccasins. "For my mother," he explained. "She says bare feet cannot dance with buffalo, cannot walk new trails." His eyes met Clara's. "Cannot find new home if that is what your heart chooses." Clara accepted the moccasins, understanding the deeper meaning. In the gift there was not just footwear, but possibility. Not just acceptance, but an invitation. The beadwork caught the winter sunlight, scattering tiny rainbows across the snow. "Thank you," she said, her words feeling inadequate for the magnitude of what was being offered. Then carefully forming the sound she had learned that morning, Pillar Meyer. "Thank you," in their tongue. Colt Hawk's smile was like the sunrise, warm, bright, and full of promise. Around them, the rhythm of the women's work continued, now feeling less foreign, more like a song. Clara was slowly learning to sing. The bone needle glinted in the firelight as Clara worked her fingers, moving with growing confidence through the layers of hide. 2 weeks had passed since her arrival, marked by the waxing of the winter moon and the steady accumulation of new skills. The needle, a gift from an elder named Martha Lane, had become both a tool and a teacher. Its smooth surface worn by generations of women's hands. "Good tension," Nora Hale noted, watching Clara's careful stitches. "Strong seam keeps wind out, warmth in." She pointed to the geometric pattern Clara was attempting to replicate. Pattern tells story. Each line, each turn has meaning. Clara nodded, studying the way the design seemed to flow like a river across the leather. She had learned that nothing in their craft was purely decorative. Every pattern held significance. Every color carried meaning. The simple sewing she had learned in her former life seemed childish compared to this complex art of storytelling through stitch and bead. "What story does this one tell?" Clara asked, tracing her fingers over the half-finished design. Nora Hale's eyes crinkled with approval at the question. "Speaks of journey," she explained. "See here, this line shows path through storm. These marks like snowflakes, they mean change, transformation." She touched the spiral at the center gently. "That is heart finding home." The symbolism wasn't lost on Clara. She had noticed how the women's teachings often carried deeper meanings, lessons wrapped in the practical skills of daily life. Even the way they prepared food held wisdom. Nothing wasted, everything used in its proper time and way. A commotion outside drew their attention. Young hunters were returning their successful hunt, marked by calls of celebration. Clara found herself recognizing more words now, understanding fragments of conversations that would have been meaningless just days ago. "Go," Nora Hale urged with a knowing smile. "My son waits with others. Perhaps he shows you the proper way to honor buffalo spirit." Clara carefully set aside her work, wrapping the precious needle in its leather case. As she emerged from the lodge, the brilliant winter sun made her squint. The hunting party had indeed returned with a buffalo, its massive form already being prepared for butchering with practiced efficiency. Colt Hawk stood among the hunters, his face flushed with exertion and success. He had been away for 3 days, tracking the herd, though Clara had marked each sunset until his return. Now he spoke with the other men, describing something with animated gestures. But his eyes found her immediately. "Come," he called, meeting her halfway. "Time you learn buffalo ways." The next hour passed in a blur of activity and instruction. Clara watched and helped, as the women worked with incredible coordination, each knowing their role in the ancient dance of providing for the tribe. Nothing went to waste. Meat, hide, bones, organs, each part had its purpose. "See how they save the blood," Tessa Gray whispered to Clara as they worked. "Mix with herbs, make strong medicine. Your people throw away many good things." "Yes." Clara thought of the wasteful hunting she had witnessed at the settlement, where men shot buffalo by the dozens, taking only the choice cuts and leaving the rest to rot. "To rot, yes," she admitted. "They do not understand the buffalo's gift." "You understand now." Tessa Gray said, a satisfied note in her voice, beginning to see with Apache eyes. As the sun began to dip lower, the work continued by firelight. Clara's arms ached, but it was a good kind of pain, the kind earned through hard work. She observed the women, their movements smooth and practiced, every task carried out with efficiency passed down through generations. Each task had its rhythm, its proper way, yet there was room for laughter and conversation. Colt Hawk returned near the time the stars began to appear, offering Clara a steaming bowl of broth. "First taste always goes to the hunters," he explained, "but I save a special piece for you. Build strength for winter's learning." Their fingers brushed as Clara took the bowl, and she felt warmth that had nothing to do with the heat of the broth. She sipped carefully, savoring the rich, savory taste, which was becoming familiar. "Thank you for teaching me," she said softly, "all of you. I never knew there was so much to understand." "You learn fast." Colt Hawk said, his voice warm with pride. "See things others miss. Tomorrow, if you wish, I'll show you how to read buffalo tracks in the snow. Many stories are written there, for those who know how to look." Clara touched the bone needle in its case at her belt, thinking of Nora Hale's words about patterns and meaning. She was starting to see them everywhere now, on beadwork and tracks, in the way the smoke rose from the lodge fires and in the dance of snowflakes against the darkening sky. Each day brought new understanding, new threads in a pattern she was only beginning to weave. "I would like that," she said, surprised at how true the words felt. The past was receding like the storm that had brought her here, and in its place a different future was slowly taking shape. The scout's message arrived with the bitter wind of late winter, carried by a young rider who was clearly exhausted. His horse spoke of hard travel. Clara was grinding herbs with Nora Hale when the sharp beat of drums cut through the routine sounds of the camp. One beat, then 3, then 1 again, the signal for the council to gather. Colt Hawk appeared at the entrance to the lodge, his face serious. "Scouts bring news from eastern lands," he said, his voice low enough that only Clara and his mother could hear. "Bluecoats move in winter. This is not their way." Clara's hands stilled on the grinding stone. Bluecoats, the cavalry, her people's army, though she could no longer think of them as hers. She had learned enough in the past month to understand what their movement meant. Broken treaties, threatened lands, and the steady push of civilization into sacred spaces. How many, Nora Hale asked, already reaching for her medicine bundles? Many more than last summer. Colt Hawk said, his hand moving to the eagle feather in his hair. They build a new fort in the Black Hills. Sacred land. His eyes met Clara's, and she saw a weight of unspoken concern in them. The council must decide. You should come. Clara wiped her hands clean, her heart quickening. She had never been invited to a council meeting before. Are you sure the elders need to hear the truth from one who knows Waseku ways? He finished. You have earned a place here, a right to speak. Outside, the camp had taken on the tense alertness of a herd sensing wolves. Warriors gathered near the council lodge, their usual easy manner replaced by a focused intensity. Jace Ryder stood among them, deep in conversation with the exhausted scout. He looked up as Clara approached with Colt Hawk, giving her a solemn nod. The council lodge was thick with pipe smoke when they entered, the air heavy with unspoken concerns. The grandfather, sat in his place of honor, the sacred pipe resting across his knees. His face was unreadable, but Colt Hawk led Clara to a spot in the circle where they were both acknowledged with a slight nod. The scout's words, translated in whispers by Colt Hawk, painted a grim picture. The new fort was larger than any before built to house hundreds of soldiers. Supply wagons arrived daily, bringing not just provisions, but heavy weapons. More settlers followed in their wake, cutting trees, staking claims. They hunt our buffalo to feed their soldiers, Jace Ryder added bitterly. Leave the carcasses to rot, taking only tongues and hides. Sacred creatures, dying for nothing. An elder spoke up, his words carrying the weight of many winters. We've seen this before. First the fort, then the towns. Soon the iron horse will follow, splitting our lands like lightning splits a tree. Clara felt the eyes of the council turn to her. Taking a deep breath, she rose to her feet. Months ago, she would have trembled at such attention. Now Clara stood, tall, grounded in the strength of her new family. The Bluecoats will not stop. She said, her words carefully translated by Colt Hawk. I have heard their leaders speak. They believe it is their destiny to own all lands, sea to sea. They do not see, as you see, that the land owns itself. He continued, his voice steady. That the buffalo are kin, that waters run free, by sacred right. The grandfather leaned forward, his dark eyes intense, and asked, And you, woman between worlds, what do you see? Clara touched the bone needle at her belt, drawing strength from its familiar presence. I see two paths. One leads to war, where many will die on both sides, and in the end, the guns and numbers of the Waseku will prevail. The other... She paused, feeling the weight of her next words. The other requires something harder than fighting. A murmur ran through the lodge, and Colt Hawk's hand brushed hers, briefly, offering silent support. Speak, the grandfather commanded. Learn their ways while keeping your own, Clara said. Not to submit, but to survive, to protect what matters most, your children, your stories, your ceremonies. The Waseku fear what they do not understand. Perhaps understanding can become a shield, stronger than war. Silence fell, broken only by the crack of burning wood in the central fire. Then Jace Ryder spoke, his voice thoughtful. She speaks with a warrior's heart, though she counsels against war. The buffalo teaches us, Tessa Gray added from her place in the circle. When the storm comes, they face the wind, stand strong. Together, this is how they survive winter. The grandfather lifted the sacred pipe, his motion drawing all eyes. The spirits brought us this one, he said, gesturing to Clara with the pipe stem. Perhaps they knew such storms were coming. Perhaps they sent us one who could help us see through Waseku eyes while teaching them to see through ours. But before he could speak further, a cry came from outside the alarm signal. 3 sharp whistles cutting through the winter air. Colt Hawk was on his feet instantly. Clara rose beside him. Riders coming, Jace Ryder called from the lodge entrance. Many riders from the east. The dreamcatcher swayed in the cold breeze, entering through the lodge's smoke hole. Its intricate web caught the last rays of sunset. Clara had woven it herself, guided by Nora Hale's patient hands during the tense hours of waiting. Now it hung as a testament to something she could no longer deny. Her heart had found its home here. In this place she once feared, with this man she had been taught to distrust. Colt Hawk entered the lodge like a shadow, his movements silent despite his warrior's build. The riders they had feared turned out to be a friendly band seeking shelter from the heavy snow. But the false alarm had awakened something in both of them, an awareness of precious time slipping away like water through cupped hands. You should be resting, he said softly, settling beside her near the fire. Long days, much worry. I'm learning to weave dreams, Clara replied, gesturing to her creation. Your mother says it helps calm troubled thoughts. He studied the dream catcher, noting the personal touches she had added to the traditional design. A small carved horse, like the one he had given her, was worked into the web's center with beads, the color of the winter sky, marking the cardinal directions. You weave more than dreams, he observed. His voice carried a depth of meaning that made her heart quicken. You weave two worlds together, like a spider, making a bridge between branches. Clara turned to face him, finding courage in the warm glow of the fire. When I first came here, I thought I was learning to be Dakota. But now I understand I'm learning to be more fully myself. She touched one of the dreamcatcher's feathers. These past months, you and your people have taught me to see with new eyes, to feel with a larger heart. Colt Hawk's hand found hers in the growing darkness. And you have taught us also. He said, his fingers intertwined with hers, warm and calloused, from bow and rein. You've shown us that Wasiku can have good hearts when given the chance to understand. The fire crackled, sending sparks dancing upward like early stars. Outside, the evening sounds of the camp created a familiar symphony. Women calling children to supper horses, nickering softly the distant pulse of drums from the young men's lodge. Clara had learned to read these sounds like a language, to understand the rhythm of a life lived in harmony with earth and sky. The council respects your words now. Colt Hawk continued, his thumb tracing gentle circles on her palm. They see wisdom in walking between worlds. But he hesitated, something vulnerable entering his expression. I wonder if you walk alone. Or perhaps there is room on that path for two. Colt Hawk's voice was low, the question hanging in the air between them. Clara's breath caught in her throat. They had been moving toward this moment for weeks each day, pulling them closer like two rivers converging into one. But to hear it spoken aloud, to face it directly, that was different. This was real. When I was young, she said carefully, my grandmother told me that love is like an arrow. Once it's loosed, it flies straight and true, carrying nothing but its course and never minding the boundaries men draw on maps. She squeezed his hand. I didn't understand then, but I do now. Colt Hawk reached up with his free hand, touching the dream catcher with reverent fingers. My people say dreams show us truth if we're brave enough to see it. Many nights I dream of the future. Not just mine, but of all our people. In my dream I see two paths. I see, like you spoke of in council. Clara whispered, though something in her heart already knew the answer. One path leads to war, he said softly, to an end. And the other, Clara asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Colt Hawk paused, his voice almost a breath. I see children with eyes like the summer sky and hair like the river at night. I see lodges where both languages are spoken, where both ways are honored. I see you teaching these children to walk proud in two worlds, while I teach them to hear the wisdom of the wind, to read the signs of the buffalo. The dreamcatcher turned slowly above them, its web catching the firelight like dew on grass. Clara thought of her father's rigid beliefs, of the settlers' fearful prejudices. She thought of Colt Hawk's people, how their initial weariness had slowly turned to acceptance. And she thought of her own heart, how it had grown beyond the narrow confines of her old life into something vast, as free as the prairie itself. When I weave, she said, lifting their joined hands toward the dreamcatcher, I weave for that future. When I pray for that path. She met his eyes directly. I choose to walk it with you, if you'll have me. Colt Hawk's answer came not in words, but in the gentle press of his lips against her forehead, a gesture so tender it brought tears to her eyes. Above them, the dreamcatcher turned in a sudden draft, its shadows dancing on the lodge walls like spirits celebrating a union written in the stars long before either of them drew breath. The broken arrow lay in the fresh snow like an omen. Its shaft split cleanly down the middle. Jace Ryder had found it at dawn, along with tracks that spoke of settlers moving through their hunting grounds. But these were no random homesteaders. The prints showed an organized search pattern, methodical and purposeful. Your brother leads them. Jace Ryder told Clara, his voice gentle, despite the weight of his words. We found his horse's marks, the one with the star on its foot, just like you described. Clara's hands tightened around the rim of her cooking basket. Benjamin, her eldest brother, the one who had once sworn to protect her, was now leading a search party through Apache lands. Whether to rescue or condemn her, she couldn't be sure. Colt Hawk stood at the lodge entrance, his expression troubled. They camped 3 valleys away, he said, his voice steady. 15 men, well armed. He moved closer to Clara enough that she could feel his warmth. What would your brother do if he found you here? The question hung in the air like winter breath. Clara thought of Benjamin's fierce pride, his unwavering belief in their father's harsh God. He would try to save me, she said finally, her voice quiet, even if it meant destroying everything. And everyone here. Nora Hale, who had been quietly preparing medicines, spoke up, her voice, calm but firm. Then we must save him instead. Save him from his own blind heart. Colt Hawk's hand found the empty quiver where the broken arrow had once been. Some of the young warriors speak of attacking. They say it's better to strike first, drive the settlers from our hunting grounds. His voice carried the weight of leadership, but his eyes softened as they met Clara's. But blood calls to blood. This is your family. No, Clara Thornfield said more sharply than she intended. You are my family now, all of you. She touched the beaded dress she wore, the bone needle at her belt, and the dream catcher that now hung above their shared sleeping furs. These past months have taught me what true family means. Not just bonds of birth, but bonds of choice. Jace Ryder nodded, a look of approval passing through his eyes, but his expression remained heavy with concern. Choice or birth, blood will flow if they find the camp. Too many guns. Too much fear on both sides. Tessa Gray, who had entered quietly during their discussion, added her voice. The women talk of moving the camp early. Many remember stories of other bands who waited too long, lost everything to bluecoat guns. Colt Hawk paced the lodge, his steps measured and deliberate. Moving camp takes time. Winter makes travel slow, dangerous for the young ones and the elders. He paused, looking at Clara Thornfield, with eyes full of love and worry. But perhaps we can turn their fear to understanding, as you have turned ours. Clara Thornfield stood, her heart blooming with understanding. You mean for me to go to them? No, the word burst from Colt Hawk with unexpected force. He crossed to her in 2 long strides, taking her hands in his. They left you to die once. I will not risk it. You must, she interrupted gently, squeezing his hands, drawing strength from their warmth. You know this is the way. Let me be the bridge you spoke of. Let me show them what I have learned about walking between worlds. Jace Ryder's hand moved to his weapon, but Colt Hawk stopped him with a look. If you go, he said to Clara Thornfield, I go with you. No more separation. The broken arrow caught the morning light, its splintered shaft casting twin shadows on the snow. Clara Thornfield thought of her grandmother's lessons about omens, now mixed with the Apache teachings about signs and spirits. Perhaps this broken arrow spoke not of warfare, but of the breaking of old ways, the emergence of something new from the shattered pieces of the past. Together then, she agreed. But we must go soon before the young warriors grow too restless, before my brother's fear hardens into hatred. Nora Hale rose, her medicine bundles in hand. I will prepare protection bundles. The spirits must guide this meeting. She touched Clara Thornfield's cheek with maternal tenderness. You have warrior's heart, daughter. Not for fighting, but for making peace. A harder battle that. Colt Hawk spoke rapidly to Jace Ryder in their language, the battle plans shifting into plans for peace. Jace Ryder nodded already, moving to select the warriors who would accompany them. Not the hot-blooded ones, eager for combat, but the steady ones, those who had learned to value wisdom over glory. Clara Thornfield retrieved the dream catcher from their lodge, carefully wrapping it in soft hide. Its web had caught more than dreams. It had caught a vision of possibility. Now she had to make others see that vision. She had to prove that understanding could bridge the chasm between worlds better than bullets ever could. "We leave at midday," Colt Hawk announced, returning to her side. "Small party, peaceful approach." He touched the eagle feather in his hair and gently tucked a matching one into Clara Thornfield's braid. "We go not as warriors, but as teachers. Show them the truth they do not expect." The morning sun climbed higher, making the shadows of the broken arrow dance across the snow. Clara Thornfield thought of Eli Blackwood, of the brother he had been before fear and prejudice had hardened his heart. Perhaps like the arrow, what was broken could be remade into something new. Not restored to what it was, but transformed into what it might become. The shared blanket wrapped around their shoulders as Clara Thornfield and Colt Hawk sat at the edge of the camp, watching the stars emerge one by one into the crystal-clear winter sky. These quiet moments had become precious to them, more so now with danger approaching. The blanket, a wedding gift from Nora Hale, though no formal ceremony had yet been held, bore the pattern of two rivers, joining to form one picked out in white and blue beads against dark wool. "My father used to say that stars are holes in the floor of heaven," Clara Thornfield murmured, leaning into Colt Hawk's warmth. "What do your people say of them?" His arm tightened around her slightly as he pointed upward. "Each star is an ancestor's fire," he explained. "They camp above, watching over us, sharing stories among themselves about the people below." His voice took on the rhythmic quality of a teaching tale. "When great warriors or wise women leave this world, they join the star nation, adding their fire to the sky." Clara Thornfield touched the eagle feather in her hair, matching the one Colt Hawk wore. "And what stories will they tell of us, do you think? Of a Lakota warrior and a white woman who found each other in the storm. They will tell of courage," Colt Hawk said softly, "of hearts strong enough to break old patterns like spring ice breaking on a river." His hand found Clara's beneath the blanket. "They will tell of love that builds bridges instead of walls." A comfortable silence settled between them, filled with the sounds of the night they had both learned to read like an old storybook. The distant howl of wolves, the whisper of wind through bare branches, the soft thud of snow falling from laden boughs. In the camp behind them, children's laughter mingled with the women's songs and the steady pulse of evening drums. "I'm afraid," Clara admitted, finally voicing the fear she had kept close all day, not of Eli Blackwood, or even of what might happen tomorrow. "I'm afraid of failing, of not being strong enough to make them understand what I've learned here." Colt Hawk shifted to face her, his dark eyes serious in the starlight. "Tell me what you've learned." Clara considered, watching her breath form patterns in the cold air. "I've learned that strength isn't always about standing firm. Sometimes it's about being willing to change, to flow like water around stones. I've learned that wisdom doesn't always speak in a language we know, but it's there in the buffalo's tracks, in the way birds fly before a storm, in the patterns women weave into blankets and beads." She touched the blanket around them, tracing the lines. "It's symbolic rivers. Most of all, I've learned that love isn't about possession or control. It's about making space for someone to become their truest self, even if that self surprises us." Colt Hawk's hand rose to cup her cheek, his thumb gently tracing the curve of her cheekbone. "You see, you have warrior's wisdom already. Speak to your brother with such truth, and he must hear it, even if hearing hurts at first." "And if he doesn't," Clara whispered, "then we face whatever comes together." Colt Hawk gestured to the stars above. "Like those two bright ones there, separate lights. But to earth-walking eyes they look like one star, two paths joining, making a new way through the sky." Clara leaned into his touch, remembering how she had once flinched from it, in fear and strangeness. Now his presence was as essential to her as breath, as natural as the turning of seasons. "When we return," she said, "I want to make it official. I want to marry according to your ways, to be joined before your people and the spirits they honor." Colt Hawk's smile was brilliant in the darkness. "And I will learn your ways too." We will build something new, something that honors both paths. He touched her braid, where it mingled with his black and brown strands twined together. Like this, separate but stronger together. From the camp came Nora Hale's voice, calling them to the evening meal. They rose together, the blanket still wrapped around both their shoulders. As they walked back toward the firelight, Clara felt the weight of tomorrow's challenge, but also the strength of this love they had forged against all odds. In the sky above, stars continued their ancient dance, watching over two people who dared to dream of a new way, a bridge between worlds built not of timber and iron, but of understanding and hope. Tomorrow would bring what it would bring, but tonight, beneath the star, nation's countless fires, there were simply two hearts beating, as one beneath a shared blanket, writing their own story into the endless winter sky. The war paint rested in its ceremonial bowl, a mixture of red ochre and sacred herbs that caught the dawn light like dried blood. Clara watched as Colt Hawk prepared it with careful reverence. His movements were measured and deliberate, though they came in peace. The paint would be needed not as a threat, but as spiritual protection, a symbol of their determination to stand strong before whatever came. Paint tells a story, he explained, mixing the colors with practiced hands. Red for life's blood, for courage, white for wisdom, for peace. His fingers traced designs in the air, each line speaking to the spirits, asking their guidance. Jace Ryder entered the lodge already wearing his own paint subtle patterns that spoke of protection rather than aggression. Scouts report, your brother's party has moved closer, he said to Clara. They search us in a spiral pattern like a hawk circling its prey. We'll find them by midday. Clara nodded, her throat tight. She wore her beaded dress, but had added her grandmother's shawl, a bridge between her old life and new. How do the young warriors fare, she asked. They obey, Jace Ryder replied, though his expression suggested it wasn't easy. Colt Hawk's words carry weight. They watch and wait as ordered. Colt Hawk began applying his paint, each stroke precise and meaningful. We take 12 riders, he said. 4 to guard the flanks, 4 to watch the rear, 4 to approach. He met Clara's eyes in the polished copper mirror, small enough not to threaten, large enough to command respect. Clara Thornfield thought of Eli Blackwood, her brother. He was always proud, she said, remembering his quick temper, his fierce sense of family honor. He won't expect me to come to him freely. In his mind, I must be a captive, bewitched, or broken. Then we show him the truth he does not expect, Colt Hawk replied, finishing the last line of paint. Show him a sister who has grown strong, not weak, who chooses a path with clear eyes and a brave heart. Nora Hale entered, carrying small bundles of herbs and prayers. For protection, she said, tucking them into Clara's dress and then Colt Hawk's shirt. Medicine for peace if they will accept it. Medicine for strength if they will not. Outside, horses stomped in the cold morning air, their breath forming clouds in the pale light. The warriors, chosen for their skill and resolve, waited with patience, their paint subtle like the feathers of young hawks. They were ready for peace, but prepared for any other outcome. Clara recognized Rain Dancer's husband and Morning Star's brother among them, men who had come to know her as family. Standing Bear addressed the group in both languages, his voice carrying a quiet, commanding authority. We go not to fight, but to understand. Not to conquer, but to connect. He helped Clara mount behind him, her arms instinctively wrapping around his waist. Watch for signals, stay calm, no matter what they say. Young Hawk warned, riding alongside them. They will have guns, he added in a low voice. We have truth. Standing Bear replied, his tone steady. A stronger weapon, if we use it wisely. They rode on as the sun crept over the eastern hills. 12 riders, moving like shadows across the snow-covered land, cut through the winter landscape. Clara felt the weight of the medicine bundles against her. The familiar scent of Standing Bear's paint mingled with the cold morning air. Everything felt sharper, more vivid, as though each sound and sensation had been etched into her memory with crystal clarity. An eagle appeared overhead, circling above them. Before it flew eastward, Standing Bear touched the feather in his hair, then Clara's. "Good sign," he whispered. "The eagle's path offers protection." They rode in silence after that, each person lost in their thoughts and prayers. Clara rehearsed what she would say to Benjamin. She knew their first encounter would be crucial. He would be looking for signs of abuse or coercion to justify his assumptions about her captivity. But she had changed. She would show him a woman, transformed by choice and love stronger for having walked between worlds. By mid-morning, they crested a rise and saw smoke rising from a camp in the valley below. Young Hawk raised his hand to signal a halt. Through the cold, clear air, they could make out figures moving around the fires, the shapes of horses and weapons. 15 men, young Hawk said softly, confirming the number. Armed as expected. The guards were posted, but they weren't well positioned, too confident in their numbers. Standing Bear squeezed Clara's hand, where it rested on his chest. "Ready?" he asked. She straightened, the weight of both worlds pressing down on her. The beaded dress, her grandmother's shawl, the eagle feather, and bone needle, they were all symbols of a life bridging ancient divisions. Standing Bear raised his arm, and their small group advanced with perfect unity. They emerged from the shadows of the trees, like spirits made flesh. The winter sun caught their paint and beadwork, making them shine like something from another world. Below, a shout rose from the settler camp. Metal gleamed as weapons were drawn. Standing Bear's voice carried over the noise, firm and clear. "We come in peace, but we come with pride. We are not supplicants, but equals. We seek not approval, but understanding." Clara spotted a familiar figure emerge from the group of settlers. Tall, broad-shouldered, her father's son, Benjamin. He shaded his eyes against the sun and stared up at the approaching riders. The moment of contact was coming, as inevitable as an arrow in flight. Clara straightened her back, feeling the strength of her chosen family around her. Whatever came next would shape not just her future, but the future of two peoples. She touched the medicine bundle at her heart, sending a silent prayer to both the God of her childhood and the spirits of the land. The snow beneath their horses' hooves crunched like destiny itself. The two-spirit necklace around Clara's neck caught the winter sunlight, its shells and beads clicking softly like prayer counters as she dismounted. Raindancer had given it to her that morning, explaining its meaning. Two spirits in one body, two worlds in one heart. Like you, now not torn between, but made stronger by both. Benjamin's face twisted with a storm of emotions as Clara approached. Standing Bear stayed close beside her, but didn't touch. Recognition, relief, confusion at her newfound freedom, anger at the way she was dressed, and the pride she showed while wearing it. His hands hovered near his pistol, but didn't draw. "We thought..." "Father said I thought you were dead." Benjamin's voice cracked slightly. Clara kept her voice gentle but firm. "Or that I was a captive. Look at me, Benjamin. Really look." The two groups held their positions tense and disciplined. Young Hawk's warriors sat with calm calculation, while Benjamin's men nervously touched their weapons, their eyes darting between Clara and the painted riders who surrounded them. "You're dressed like them," Benjamin said, his words carrying both accusation and disbelief. "Speaking their language." He glared at Standing Bear. "What have you done to her?" "He saved my life," Clara said, stepping forward. "After our own people, our own family left me to die in the storm." She touched the two-spirit necklace. "He and his people showed me what true Christianity looks like. Love for strangers, mercy for enemies, wisdom to see God's hand in unfamiliar ways." Standing Bear spoke then, his English careful but clear. "We are all equal in the eyes of the Creator. No man is above another. Your sister walks free, chooses her path." Colt Hawk's voice was firm, though the words were carefully chosen. "We come not to fight, but to build a bridge between peoples." Benjamin's hand tightened on his pistol. "Build a bridge. They're savages, Sarah." His voice was sharp with frustration. They raid settlements, steal cattle. Clara Thornfield stood tall before him, her gaze unwavering. And what do we do to them? Benjamin, push them from their land, break treaties, kill buffalo by the hundreds for sport. She gestured to the warriors standing around them. Look at them. Benjamin, look with new eyes. As I had to learn to do, these are not savages. These are people who understand things we've forgotten. Forgotten? Benjamin spat. Like what? Like how to live with the land instead of fighting it. Clara Thornfield answered softly, her voice steady. Like how to see the sacred in all things, not just within church walls. She moved closer to him, her voice firm. Like how to let love be stronger than fear. A murmur ran through Benjamin's men at her words. She recognized some of them, sons of settlers, young men she had known from the community. They looked different now, somehow, smaller in their heavy winter coats, their hands nervously clutching rifles. Show them, Colt Hawk said softly in Lakota. Show them what you have learned. Clara Thornfield reached into her dress and withdrew a small bundle wrapped in soft hide. Inside was the wooden horse Colt Hawk had given her months ago, now accompanied by one she had carved herself. She held them out to Benjamin. This first one taught me patience, respect the value of seeing deeply. She explained, her fingers brushing the carved edges. The second one I made myself, learning their ways not to become them, but to understand them, to build something new. She placed the carvings into her brother's unwilling hands. Feel the difference between them. The first is what I was taught. The second is what I learned to create myself. Benjamin stared at the carvings, his fingers tracing their shapes despite himself. A lifetime of shared memories passed between them in that simple touch, days of playing with wooden toys, their mother's songs, their father's prayers, before the fear came, before the walls went up. Sarah, he whispered, his voice breaking. For a moment she heard her little brother again, the one who used to beg her for stories. Then his words hit her like a blow. Father is dying. Colt Hawk's hand found Clara Thornfield's shoulder, steadying her. She covered it with her own, drawing strength from his presence. The consumption, she asked quietly, her voice small. Benjamin nodded. Started last month. He sent us to find you. Said he was wrong. He paused. Said he needs to see you before the wind carries him away. The sound of Jace Ryder shifting in his saddle broke the moment, the creak of leather, speaking volumes about choices and consequences. Clara Thornfield felt the weight of both worlds pressing in. Her father's deathbed and her new life. The past she'd fled and the future she'd chosen. Colt Hawk's voice came soft but clear. The bridge you build must go both ways. Clara Thornfield straightened, touching the two-spirit necklace around her neck. In its beads she felt the wisdom of both paths, the Christian charity she'd been taught and the Apache understanding she had learned. Perhaps this is why the spirits brought me here, she said quietly, looking between Benjamin and her chosen family. Not just to find my own way, but to help others find theirs. Then we build it together, she said, her voice steady. All of us. The peace pipe lay before them in the snow, its polished surface reflecting the midday sun. Colt Hawk had produced it with ceremonial gravity. The same pipe his grandfather had used to welcome Clara Thornfield months ago. Now it represented something larger, a chance to transform enemies into allies, fear into understanding. Our ways teach that sharing smoke means sharing truth, Colt Hawk explained to the wary settlers. No man can speak false while the pipe is lit. No hand can hold weapon while the pipe is passed. Benjamin stared at the pipe, then at Clara Thornfield. She saw the internal struggle in his eyes, the conflict between his ingrained prejudice and the doubt creeping in. Around them both groups held their positions, but the air had shifted. Curiosity began to replace suspicion. Your Protestant God speaks of peace, Clara Thornfield said softly to Benjamin. Their pipe ceremony honors the same spirit of truth. Different paths, same destination. She touched the wooden horses, still in his hands. Like these carvings, different hands, same heart. A young settler, Clara Thornfield, recognized him as Luke Calloway's son, stepped forward hesitantly. "My grandmother," he said, his voice nervous. "She traded with Indians before the Troubles. Said they knew medicines white doctors hadn't dreamed of." Colt Hawk nodded gravely. "Many medicines. My mother, great healer, knows ways to fight consumption's cough." His eyes met Benjamin's. The words hung heavy between them like frost settling in the air. "Could help your father, perhaps." Benjamin's fingers tightened around the wooden horses, his knuckles pale with tension. "Our father would never—" His voice faltered. "Our father is dying." Clara Thornfield gently interrupted, her voice calm but firm. "And his last wish was to make things right." What better way than this? She gestured to the peace pipe that lay between them. "Let us build something new from the broken pieces of the old." Jace Ryder, who had remained silent up until now, spoke in careful English. "My wife's brother died of the same sickness. White man's disease, but old ways sometimes help ease passing. Give comfort when nothing else can." Something shifted in Benjamin's stance, his earlier anger giving way to something else. Clara Thornfield could see it, the moment when pride was replaced with desperate hope. "You would do this?" Benjamin asked. "Help the man who cast you out." "We help because it is right," Colt Hawk said simply. "As I helped Clara Thornfield in the storm, no one owns wisdom. No one owns healing. These things belong to all people, like air we breathe." Slowly, with deliberate movements, as if crossing an invisible line, Benjamin knelt beside the peace pipe. "Show me," he said hoarsely. "Show me your way." Colt Hawk began the ceremony with practiced grace, explaining each motion, each prayer. Clara Thornfield translated when necessary, but increasingly the men began communicating directly, finding common ground in their gestures and shared intent. The other settlers drew closer, weapons, lowering faces, softening with curiosity. "See how he prepares the sacred tobacco," Clara Thornfield explained to the gathering circle. "Each pinch offered first to earth and sky, to the four directions, like our way of crossing ourselves, marking the sacred in physical form." One of Benjamin's men, a gruff older settler named Jack Mercer, snorted softly. "Heathens marking directions while we build proper churches. And what are your church steeples pointing to?" Clara Thornfield challenged gently. "What are your cross-topped spires but markers reaching for heaven?" Different words, same yearning. The peace pipe passed from hand to hand, each man taking his turn, with growing respect for the ceremony. Clara Thornfield watched hope bloom like winter flowers as barriers crumbled, as human faces emerged from behind masks of prejudice and fear. Colt Hawk spoke then, of the coming soldiers of threatened lands and broken promises. Benjamin spoke of settlers' fears of mysterious raids and missing cattle. Together they began to see the larger picture, outside forces pushing both peoples toward conflict neither truly wanted. "Perhaps," Benjamin said, slowly passing the pipe back to Colt Hawk, "perhaps there is room for both ways here, room for understanding." Clara Thornfield felt tears freeze on her cheeks, but they were tears of joy. She saw in the faces around her the same transformation she had experienced, the slow awakening to a larger truth, a broader vision of what was possible. Jace Ryder raised his hand for attention. "Snow comes," he said, pointing to gathering clouds. "Big storm. Better to face together than apart." Benjamin looked at his men, then at the Apache warriors. "We have supplies," he offered. "Food, extra blankets. If you have shelter to share our lodges, welcome all who come in peace." Colt Hawk replied, standing tall. "We stand together not as enemies, but as allies. We are not conquerors, but teachers." He stood, offering his hand to Benjamin, in the white man's way of sealing agreements. Benjamin clasped it firmly, then turned to Clara Thornfield. "Clara Thornfield, will you come to see, Father?" Clara Thornfield felt Colt Hawk's quiet strength behind her, supporting whatever choice she made. Yes, she said, but not as a prodigal returning. I come as I am, now a bridge between worlds, a carrier of both medicines. She touched the two-spirit necklace around her neck. Let him see what his daughter has become. Perhaps in seeing he too will find peace. The first snowflakes began to fall as the two groups merged into one, enemies becoming allies under the growing storm. The peace pipe had done its work, opening hearts that guns could never reach, building bridges that would last longer than any fort's walls. The mixed marriage blanket wrapped around Clara Thornfield's shoulders as she rode beside Colt Hawk to her childhood home, its intricate pattern telling the story of their union. Lakota geometric designs flowed seamlessly into European floral motifs, neither overwhelming the other. Nora Hale had worked through 3 nights to complete it, calling it a shield of 2 worlds that would protect Clara Thornfield during the difficult reunion ahead. The storm had forced both groups to shelter together for 2 days, an unexpected blessing that allowed walls to crumble and understanding to grow. Now a small party traveled together: Clara Thornfield, Colt, Hawk, Benjamin Jace, Ryder, and 2 others from each side, who had proved most open to new ways of thinking. Strange how the storm brings peace, Jace Ryder observed, riding close enough to Clara Thornfield to share his thoughts. For a private conversation, like winter forcing enemies into the same cave, making them see each other as people. Colt Hawk's voice was steady, his words carrying weight. Clara Thornfield nodded, remembering the small exchanges that had led to larger ones. How the settler women had marveled at the Apache's winter medicines. How their men had learned the superior methods of keeping horses healthy in deep snow. Small exchanges, stories shared around fires, children playing together despite the language barrier. Father may not understand at first, Eli Blackwood warned, pulling his horse alongside hers. The consumption, it makes him feverish sometimes. He speaks of strange things, of regrets and visions. Perhaps he sees more clearly now. Colt Hawk suggested, his voice low. Sickness sometimes strips away the walls we build around hearts, shows us truths we hide from ourselves. As they crested a familiar rise, Clara Thornfield's breath caught in her throat. There it was, her childhood home. The sturdy log cabin her father had built, smoke rising from its chimney into the gray sky. The sight flooded her with memories, the summer evenings on the porch. Her mother's garden now buried under snow, the bell that called them in for supper. He insisted on moving back here from town, Eli Blackwood explained. Said he needed to be in the place where it happened, where he made his choice. Clara Thornfield felt Colt Hawk's hand cover hers where they quite rested on the reins. You are not the same woman who left here, he reminded her softly. You are stronger now, carry wisdom of both paths. They descended toward the cabin, their horses' hooves breaking through the fresh snow's crust. Clara Thornfield saw movement at the window. Her mother's face appeared briefly before vanishing again. Then the door opened and Ruth Dawson herself stepped out onto the porch, one hand pressed to her mouth in disbelief. Clara. Oh, my Clara. The cry broke something in Clara Thornfield's chest. She was off her horse and running through the snow before she realized she'd moved. Her mother's arms wrapped around her, thin but strong, smelling of wood smoke and the lavender she still grew in pots by the window. My girl, my girl. Her mother wept, touching Clara Thornfield's face, her hair the beaded dress she wore. Look at you. You're alive. You're strong. She looked past Clara to where Colt Hawk and the others waited, standing with quiet respect. And you've brought family, Clara Thornfield said firmly. I've brought my new family to meet my first one, to help heal what was broken. Understanding dawned in her mother's eyes as she took in Colt Hawk's proud bearing, the way Clara Thornfield turned naturally toward him. The consumption, Ruth Dawson said quietly. It's worse. The doctor says. She straightened her shoulders. But you're here now, and you've brought medicine. Colt Hawk dismounted, approaching with deliberate calm. He touched the medicine pouch at his belt. My mother sends healing, cannot promise cure but can ease pain. Help him find peace. Ruth Dawson studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. Peace, she repeated. Yes, that's what we all need, isn't it? Peace and understanding. They entered the cabin together. Clara Thornfield, holding the mixed marriage blanket, close around her shoulders. The interior was exactly as she remembered, her mother's quilts on the walls, her father's Bible on its stand, the scent of pine boughs and cooking herbs. And there by the fire lay the man who had once commanded her fate. Her father's face was gaunt, his once powerful frame diminished by illness, but his eyes were clear as they fixed on her, widening with recognition and something deeper. Wonder, perhaps. Or revelation. Clara! He whispered, his voice rough with more than sickness. I dreamed, he gasped. Dreamed you came with eagles wearing stars in your hair. Clara Thornfield touched the eagle feather Colt Hawk had given her, then moved to kneel beside the bed. I came with new medicine, Father, new wisdom and old love. He reached for her hand, his grip surprisingly strong. Forgive me, he said. The words seemed to cost him greatly. I was so afraid of what I didn't understand, so sure of my own rightness. There is nothing to forgive, Clara, Thornfield said gently, drawing the mixed marriage blanket around both of them. Only new paths to walk, new bridges to build. Colt Hawk stepped forward, then his medicine pouch in his hands. His presence filled the small cabin with quiet dignity. Clara Thornfield's father looked up at him, really looked, perhaps seeing for the first time not a savage but a man, not a threat but a healer. Will you? Her father struggled to sit up. Will you teach me your ways of medicine? While I still can learn, we teach each other. Colt Hawk replied, beginning to unpack his medicines. Your daughter shows us this is better way. All paths lead to the same great spirit. Yes, all healing comes from the same source. Clara Thornfield felt the warmth of the mixed marriage blanket draped around her shoulders, watching as her two worlds began to intertwine like rivers, merging to create something new and unstoppable, like the rush of spring. The prairie once covered in snow was now dotted with wildflowers. Their purple and gold petals swayed in the soft breeze, and Clara carefully gathered them, showing her young daughter which blooms were sacred medicine and which were meant for food. Just as Nora Hale had taught her. 2 years ago, Clara's daughter, little Dawn, watched intently, her dark eyes so much like her father's, following every movement of her mother's hands. Eagle feather, little Dawn exclaimed, pointing skyward. A single plume drifted down the morning sunlight, catching it before it landed. Colt Hawk appeared, almost as if summoned, catching the feather before it could touch the earth. He crouched beside them and tucked the gift into their daughter's black hair, which caught hints of Clara's brown in the sunlight. Grandfather's blessing, he said softly in English, and repeated it in Apache. Little Dawn, like her parents, was growing up with both tongues, both traditions, flowing together as naturally as rivers, meeting and forming a new stream. In the distance, the trading post that had sprung up around Mason Boone's cabin stood proudly, a sign of how much had changed. After Nora Hale's healing medicines had eased her father's passing, he had left his land with a surprising will. Half to Eli Blackwood and half to Clara Thornfield and Colt Hawk, with instructions that it should become a place where both peoples could meet in peace. Now the post saw regular trade between settlers and Apache, with Clara and Colt Hawk's home serving as a bridge between the two cultures. Nora Hale had moved nearby, teaching settlers about healing plants while learning their ways of working wool and growing gardens. Jace Ryder's children played with settler kids, easily switching between languages as they grew up together. Time for council, Colt Hawk reminded her, helping Clara Thornfield to her feet. She brushed the prairie dust off her dress, a new design that had gained popularity among both peoples, blending the practical cut of settler clothing with traditional Apache beadwork and symbolism. The council lodge stood at the heart of the trading post. Its design reflected its purpose, built in the round like a traditional Apache lodge, but with settler-style walls. It housed regular meetings where both groups came together to discuss common concerns, share knowledge, and maintain the peace they had built. Clara Thornfield touched the two-spirit necklace she still wore now, accompanied by both a cross and a medicine pouch. "Mother would be proud," she said, watching little Dawn chase butterflies through the spring flowers. To see how fear can transform into understanding when people choose to learn instead of judge. Colt Hawk gathered their daughter in his arms, the eagle feather in her hair matching his own. "You were the first to walk between worlds," he said. "Now many follow the path you helped create," he added, gesturing to a group of young settler women learning beadwork from Apache elders, while nearby tribal youth practiced reading from books brought by the last trader. "The path walks both ways," Clara Thornfield replied, remembering that first cold night when a proud warrior had offered mercy to a stranger. "We all learn, we all teach." Little Dawn wriggled free to chase more flowers, her laughter carrying on the spring wind like a promise. Above them, an eagle circled once before heading east, where the rising sun painted the prairie with the colors of hope. Clara Thornfield took Colt Hawk's hand, feeling the strength they had built together. The long winter of fear had passed here in this place. Between worlds, a new season was blooming, one where understanding grew, as naturally as prairie flowers, and love knew no boundaries except the endless sky above. All stories are created for entertainment purposes and may include fictional elements or dramatized interpretations inspired by historical settings. We use AI tools, voiceover visuals, scripts as creative assistants. However, all content is reviewed, refined, and edited by humans to ensure emotional authenticity and storytelling quality. We fully comply with YouTube's policies regarding AI-generated content and do not use any deepfake techniques or misleading recreations of real individuals. All visuals and supporting materials are properly licensed. Sharing, re-uploading, modifying, or distributing any part of this content in any form requires written permission. We appreciate your support and respect for original creative work